My talk, as is the fashion, has three parts. I'll start by laying out a big problem. The main part of my talk is to share with you a big idea, actually the history of the big idea. And it's an idea in complexity, of course. It's not my idea. And I will end by talking about some relatively small tasks. They are still big compared with my little body, but they are small compared with the big problem I start with. So, I'll tell you what the figure tells. I'll come back to the issue of complex technologies. What the figure tells is that, well, since 500 years, inequality is increasing on the planet, which means that people in the Netherlands, your little country, in my little country, Switzerland, got richer and richer, but the majority of humankind actually got poorer. Now, few people know that this is changing, and it's changing pretty much since 1975. You can put a rather precise date on it. It's changing at an amazing pace. If we don't make a major blunder, but with humankind you never know, if we don't make a major blunder, by the end of this century, global poverty is over. This is going to change the world in ways uncomparable to anything that has happened in human history. It is important to realize that it started in China. So in the 70s, China developed a new strategy which has never been tested before on the planet. And for sure, they are overcoming poverty. And this has led to a situation where billions of people do not simply not accept anymore a situation where they are condemned to persistent poverty. Now, I guess many of you have seen on the internet or wherever the photos of Shanghai these days. Who has seen the smog in Shanghai? Okay, and then there were the pictures in Beijing. Now, I want to show you another picture. Let's see whether the machine likes me now. This is London, not Shanghai. This is 1952. There's 4,000 people died there. That's not long ago. We tend to forget it, you know. We tend to say, these Chinese, they are messing everything up. Why can't they run a decent democracy like we do in Switzerland? They would have no smog. Well, the truth is, we had this stuff, not only in London. We overcame it. How? By getting rich. And once we were rich, we had the means to overcome the smog. The problem is that whilst we overcome our smog problem, we continue to generate really huge technological and social-technical problems, one of them being global warming, a completely different one being the problem of antibiotics losing their power and microorganisms catching up in the arms race against the pharmaceutical industry. There's many more like that. There's a if billions of people now pursue the kind of wealth that have invented and implemented for ourselves, we'll run into huge global disasters. And the ultimate one will be World War III, which I think is the worst case of making a big blunder in this century. The truth is we have already done 2 of them, so you know, don't be too optimistic on that. Now, I wanted to talk with you about the challenge of green growth, because the idea of green growth, which is advocated by people from South Korea to the OECD and wherever, and of course it's one of these buzzwords, perhaps even like complexity, that sounds good, but it's not so clear what it's meant by it. But still, the idea of green growth expresses the hope, perhaps the illusion, that it is possible to overcome global poverty without generating more and more disasters of technological, environmental, and other kinds. Now, can this be done? In order to answer that question, one has to look at disasters and see whether one can say anything general about them. And perhaps there's nothing general we can say, and then we have to try. So, just quickly, this is just the global distribution of income. You don't need to waste time and attention on it, but as it's there, and it's a very impressive graph once you know how to read it. This was 1970, and then 1980, 1990, 2000, and 2010 is going to be like this. What is happening is we are getting more, so the area is getting bigger. We are getting richer, so the median is moving to the right, and the distribution gets skewed to the right. And that's the really important thing. These are hundreds of millions of people nowadays in China, India, Brazil, what have you, who already have the standard of living that we are used to here. It's very unlikely that this will stop without any major catastrophe, and this is changing the world we live in. So that was just the first slide. This one you remember. That's the book by Charles Perrault that he wrote after the first of the two big space shuttle accidents. And it's one of the best books ever written in sociology, I think one can honestly say, and Perrault is certainly one of the greatest organizational researchers ever, with Max Weber perhaps. The point of his book is that there is a certain kind of accidents that we generate because we try to be hyper-rational. We try to be so rational that we control, understand what we are doing fully, and then we build a very complex, elegant, nice structure. Things are tightly coupled, everything is running smoothly. It's really wonderful to watch. The trouble is, somewhere something by chance goes wrong. And the world we live in is such that there's always something somewhere which by chance goes wrong. And Perrault argues, in a complex, tightly coupled system, sooner or later this will happen and it will lead to what he calls a normal accident. And he said it was normal that the space shuttle would run into that kind of accident. And it is true, this happened in '86, that in 2003, the second normal accident happened with the space shuttle. Now, there has been an article in the Financial Times just a few weeks ago, November 12, the design flaws that led to financial explosions. This guy, John Kay, some of you may know him, has read his Perrault, and he makes one of these nice articles that you can read when you're half asleep, but you wake up when you understand what he's saying. Because what he's saying is that financial markets are similar to nuclear power plants, which are similar to space shuttles. And that we better stop building complex, tightly coupled systems because we get more and more normal accidents. Now you see, this clearly is an important line of argument, and it has some practical implications that may be very useful. It's a big idea. Responding to a big problem. If we can have global growth without building complex, tightly coupled systems, perhaps complex, yes, but not tightly coupled, perhaps tightly coupled, yes, but then not complex, then we may be on the safe side of things. It's a very, very general statement, as these big ideas go. And there are some people who work on this sort of thing. I am one of those. We've set up a little network that's a website, so if you ask Google or whatever global system science, among the 2 or 3 first items, depending on the country you're in, you'll find this website. We just did a workshop on international reform of special drawing rights, so that's about financial markets, and I've seen that you have run projects about financial markets in the first round of your work, so there's a clear relation there. Now, this was the big problem I wanted to share with you. I'm not going to offer a solution to that problem. I don't think that problems of that size allow for the kind of solution, you know, you have a sentence, a book, a paragraph, something, and now consider it solved, as the advertisement goes. But there is an idea. And now this is really the main thing I want to share with you, because it's about how you organize research. Unfortunately, what I will share with you is not really helpful for the kind of organizations that are currently in charge of organizing research. So we have a problem there. In 1970, Gardner and Ashby published a conjecture. They did some computer simulations, actually very few. And they saw something that they found interesting. And they just published it. They said, look, we think this is interesting, perhaps somebody should look into it. But they were bold. Based on a few simulations, they said, perhaps all, you know, that's modesty, all large complex dynamic systems may be stable up to a critical level of connectance. The red is for me. What do they mean? They mean you have a large complex dynamical system. The elements can be connected, and the connection can be weak or strong, and it can exist or not exist. And then they build some parameter combining, is there a connection and is it strong? And then they say when this parameter exceeds a certain critical threshold, you run into trouble. The thing is not stable anymore. Now that's what I call a big idea. How do you test such an idea? How do you make sense of it? This was 1970, okay? 1972, that's fast. Robert May, who still is one of the most famous scientists alive, biologist, published a paper. He claims a theorem based on work by a quantum physicist, very famous guy too, Wigner, so he called it the May-Wigner theorem. He has a sketch of a proof, but it's not a proof, it's a footnote. It quotes Wigner and says, look, if you think along these lines, you will see that. The central feature of the above results, he claims they are results, for large systems is the very sharp transition from stable to unstable behavior as the complexity exceeds a critical value. So you see, this is the idea of these guys. And he comes and says, there's a mathematical structure here and there's a proof, and I can use Wigner's theorem on large random matrices, and there we go. May was a biologist, and he says, this helps you to understand the difference between a boreal forest and a rainforest. Why? The boreal forest has to deal with huge shocks, so it better be very, very stable. So it better not be very complex. The rainforest likes being very complex, so it better go into an environment that is very stable. Intuitively, that's a strong statement. It runs against a lot of things people like to believe, like when it gets warmer, we get less biodiversity. Perhaps the opposite is true. Like biodiversity makes ecosystems more robust, which many people believe, perhaps it's true. So May comes with a sketch of a mathematical proof and gives the example of ecosystems. And this has triggered a huge debate in ecology, environmental science, biology, and beyond. But for a start, you had some mathematicians looking into it. So a man called Cohen and a person called Newman, a couple of years later, it took them a decade, would come with a counterproof. And I want to share this with you, because I really don't think that we will overcome global poverty without major disaster if we don't accept the fact that we have to learn from mistakes. And we have to accept the fact that we keep making mistakes. And it's very hard to find out something really new. May was wrong in an important sense. But he was not completely wrong, and it's essential to sort out where was he wrong and where was he right. And I'm not sure that we already know. So Cohen and Newman say, we now show by explicit counterexamples that the assertions of May are false in the generality with which they are stated. They did not say they are stupid. They did not say forget about it. They say he makes a general claim, he sketches a proof, the proof doesn't work, the generality of the claim is certainly false. But they say explicitly, perhaps in a revised form, the statement will turn out to be true. And that's where they leave it. That's how research really goes on. Keep in mind, we're already a decade and more after the first conjecture. And you are talking about organizing research for 4 years with specific results that we are aiming at. Sorry, Hastings, another mathematician. I wrote an email to him, he never answered. He's like me, I don't answer mine either. So, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. So Hastings doesn't answer his emails, bad guy. Now, he gives another try. He says, okay, there was something wrong, also in his own work. Hastings had worked on this stuff. But he says, and now it gets technical. There is something called Harrison-May scaling. I will explain it to you, it's not so difficult. Stability of May-Wigner matrices tends to increase with increasing complexity. So now that's the exact opposite. And that's how research really works. You have a conjecture, you have a sketch of a proof, you found out it's not really true, and all of a sudden you have the opposite conjecture. And if you're a real researcher, you don't give up. What is this Harrison-May scaling? The Harrison-May scaling is essential, and it relates to what Laszlo was saying in his talk. Some links are weak and some links are strong. Now, if you have a complex system and it gets larger and larger and more complex, it may be that the links get weaker. This is the Harrison-May scaling. So what he's saying, if your network, your system gets more complex and larger, but the links get weaker and weaker, then you're on the safe side. But there's a threshold. The idea of the threshold survives. So this Harrison-May scaling gives you a sharp threshold. If you cross it, you are really in trouble. And then, this is 1984, and this is a mathematician. He ends his paper by saying, a brief, informal look at the world economy provides a dramatic illustration. Although trading transactions probably satisfy at least weak versions of the Harrison-May scaling rules, and so the whole thing looks safe, currency transactions need obey no such rules. This is 84. And there was no NWO, nobody saying, hey, jump on it, do research, this is important. Sooner or later we'll have a normal accident in the financial system if you're right. Instead, these guys just kept working. So this is the Royal Bank of Scotland. This is UBS, that's my country, Switzerland. Of course, this is a wonderful bank. Please go and put your money there. In the old days, you could save taxes. It's over now. This is Commerzbank, HSBC. The arrows are the strongest property relation between these guys. Well, what you see is this looks like a complex, tightly coupled system, doesn't it? And Hastings says, we need a Harrison-May scaling in there if this is to be stable. But if we talk about money, there's no reason to expect this. If we talk about, oil and Philips products and stuff, it takes time to ship these things. And if you have more customers, you distribute, the fraction of your output that goes to each customer may become smaller and smaller. So that's this thing, you need to stabilize the thing. But we're talking about money here, in an era where money is just digits on a computer. So you can have huge transactions in milliseconds, nanoseconds, whatever, with very, very tight, strong couplings in this global financial network. Nobody was looking into it from a May-Wigner perspective in those days. Biologists did their homework, or at least they tried. There's a man called McCann who did in 2000 a survey article. That's 3 decades after the first conjecture, okay? He looks at a lot of empirical research about ecosystems, and I've seen you have projects about that too, so you're clearly on track with this whole stuff. The ecosystem stability depends on the ability for communities to contain species or functional groups that are capable of differential response. And now you see, the original conjecture had nothing about that. The May-Wigner theorem had nothing about that. But it was only by stubbornly keep working on these issues that you slowly have elements that look like robust, perhaps reliable, perhaps true. So if you have a network with groups that are capable of differential response to shocks, this thing may look safe too. So now we have 2 safety conditions. One is weak couplings, and the other is this differential response thing. I'm not giving you a full list. I don't have a full list. But I think it's what we scientists, researchers can contribute to the rest of society to patiently, stubbornly sort out this sort of stuff and modestly admitting that we may still be wrong. So that's the state of play even today, as far as I know, but in this room are people who know better, and you guys are working on it, about complexity and ecosystem stability. In the meantime, people found out that there's tons of stability. There's not one kind of stability. The mathematicians had Lyapunov stability and structural stability and orbital stability, and the biologists had their stability versions, and now it gets real messy because the system is stable in one respect but not in the other one, and Laszlo says random networks are stable for this but not for that, and stuff like that. Now, this year, a group led by Stefano Battiston and Guido Caldarelli is in this group, and Nobel Prize winning Joe Stiglitz is in this group, and guess who? Robert May is in this group. He's still around. They publish a paper, and they argue forcefully that we should simplify financial markets. This is after the crisis. And they say, connectivity of market players give rise to the conditions stipulated by the May-Wigner theorem. Andy Haldane, in charge of stability at the Bank of England, is one of the co-authors, not of this particular paper, but of this kind of papers. Now, this stuff is tremendously important. Keep in mind the beginning about nuclear power plants and financial markets. Financial markets have got us very close to the abyss. I think, it's hard to prove, but I think it's fair to say that basically there's three individuals who have saved us, and that's Ben Bernanke, Mario Draghi, and Zhou Xiaochai, the Chinese governor. I don't think it's possible to say that the European governments are in any way contributing to keep us away from the abyss, but that's an important question. And I know that you have a research project on financial markets and stability. And what I would like to share with you is this May-Wigner theorem. This is a big idea. This is worth working on for decades. Is it true? I'm not sure whether this is a good question. It's not even clear what it means. Such theorems, they grow, they change their meaning in the course of time. But by now, we know a few things, and these things are important. If you give me a system that's complex, tightly coupled, and it's growing larger and more complex while staying tightly coupled, well, I'll stay away from such an animal. If you give me such a thing and show me that the links are getting weaker and weaker as it grows, I may stay within this thing. And if you show me that it has different groups capable of differential responses to shocks, I may feel even more comfortable. Now you give me financial markets, what do I see? Lots of big and small organizations, basically all capable of doing the same stuff. I don't have this differential answer capability. And the big debate about Glass-Steagall and regulating financial markets to some extent is about the question, can we and should we enforce this by regulation? Now, it's not my point to share with you views on financial regulation. I want to talk with you about green growth. But basically, I want to share with you a view of the relation between research and practice. Good research has its own rhythm. And the first big word is patience. You simply cannot decide by tomorrow I sort out the May-Wigner theorem. You can decide by tomorrow and work on it. But what I think is useful is to say I work on it in view of a specific practical problem. I find that this is very helpful, without promising that I will be able to solve the problem. I'm not a biologist, but to say, as a biologist, I want to work on the May-Wigner theorem in view of the Amazonian rainforest conservation, looks like a good research strategy to me. Or to say, look at the very same theorem in view of financial markets, looks like a good strategy. Or you have this project on the evolution of technological artifacts, planes in that case, looks like a very good strategy. Please don't misunderstand me as saying the May-Wigner theorem is the big thing. It's one big thing. There are others, but there are not so many. I don't think we have many very strong, powerful, promising ideas in complexity research. We have a few. That's enough. We can work on them. But, and here I come to the final part of my talk, what seems a good strategy for research to me is to take practical problems and connect them with some of these hard, deep, big intellectual scientific questions. And I want to give you 3 examples. One is containerization. Basically, the container has a story of about 3 centuries, and the big transition happened in the 1950s when an entrepreneur in North Carolina who was running trucks decided to buy some company that was running boats on the rivers and canals of the US, and had this idea of using boxes that were used in mining to move stuff from the trucks to the ship and back without having to unpack each individual item. Looks like a little thing. The American Army played quite some role in this. It was a huge, huge transition in the global economy. The introduction of the container is one of the biggest changes in the history of the world economy. And there are many, many small details that matter. But if you look at it from the May-Wigner perspective, what does the container do? Think of the matrix describing your network. And there is zeros where there's no connection, and there is a number, non-zero number, where there is a connection. The container splits the matrix into large chunks. Here is the trucks, here's the ships, here's the planes, and stuff like that. And between these, internally, these large chunks may be very complex and tightly knit, but between them, you have a very simple interface. And the container simplifies the interface. I have not done any mathematical analysis of this. I think it would be very interesting to ask whether containerization has increased the stability of that particular complex system by creating interfaces so as to have weakly coupled subsystems. The internet, the TCP/IP protocol, is something like a container. I guess you know how it works. I don't really know, but I have a rough idea. So I write an email to somebody, and the TCP part breaks data into packets and kicks them onto this network of routers. And as you probably know, there is no road prescribed. The brilliance of the internet is to say, let the router figure out where to kick it next, only the next step. The packets travel from router to router over the internet, and this is the IP protocol, but this guy does not see the whole email. He just sees one bit, package, and this guy sees another. Sorry, I'm too fast here. Oh. Okay. Only at the end, the TCP protocol reassembles the packets into the original whole. Now look, the TCP/IP protocol is just a little bit of code. In a sense, any grad student in computer science could have written it. It turns out that it has some fantastic mathematical properties, which the people who designed it didn't know about, just like the container has some fantastic material properties that the people who designed at the beginning didn't really know about. There's a moment of luck in these things, but of course they were smart. Now, why do I share this with you? Because of the green growth topic. Let me give you 2 examples and then I'm done. The first example is cogeneration. Sorry for the German line here, but the war is over since some time, so I hope I'm swinging out of these things. In soccer, there's still a problem, I understand. We'll talk about this soon. Now, in cogeneration, clearly there is the possibility of having networks of cogeneration units in buildings, be they business, whatever, dwellings, whatever, and you can have it combined with some wind here and some solar here. You can have a complex network combining renewable energy with a rather smart way of using, say, gas, which I understand is running out in your country, but I think you still have some, and otherwise the Russians are happy to help. And I come back to the Russians, because look, 2/3 of heating energy for buildings in Russia is generated by district heating. 2/3. And believe me, the district heating in Russia does really look like this. Now, whoever comes up with a truly stable and efficient system of cogeneration makes a big difference, in my assessment. To my surprise, it is really hard to come up with a good system. Because it seems, and Volkswagen is teaming up with the German power company to set up such a system, and they don't really succeed on the marketplace, it seems that optimizing an engine for cars or machines really leads you to different designs than optimizing it for this kind of thing. And optimizing the other components is also such that cogeneration comes with disadvantages. And linking it with renewables, you have all this intermittency problem, which is the great, great challenge for renewables, which to some extent is a software problem nowadays. So there is the possibility of developing complex energetic systems that are really important, that can make a big difference. But you have these questions. Can we have a TCP/IP protocol in there? Is there a container? Can we somehow break down this network along lines that keep us safe from the Mavignor threat, if you like? Well, in Sydney, they're making a network where they have not only heat and energy, they also cool, because it's hot in Australia. In Phoenix, where I spent part of my life, it's the same, it's also hot. So perhaps somebody, and it has to be a network of businesses, and you have a project about that too, so I'm going to listen about it, perhaps we will see something there. That's what I mean by a small problem. Trying to develop competitive cogeneration network, not networks that only work because they are subsidized and protected by regulation, etc. No, they're simply competitive. And look at this from a complex systems perspective that can really make a difference for global green growth. It's just one of the small tasks in that big thing. And I end with the other ones. This is the Chinese coastline. This is August 2012. There were 3 typhoons, all targeting the Chinese coastline. Not all of 3 really hit. Still, there was quite some damages. But this coastline, as you can imagine, is very long. There's lots of people there. There's lots of property there. The question of how to build dams and how to integrate the dams in the complex, perhaps too tightly coupled, growing structure of the Chinese economy is one of the big, big questions in climate policy and in several other policy fields. I understand that in this country some people know something about dams, so perhaps we can help sorting this out. Thank you.
Thank you.